If you love great stories, you've come to the right place. Subscribe to my channel to make sure you don't miss any new videos. Like and share this video with your friends if you enjoyed it, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Luke walked down a long and wide hallway of the maze. He had already been left behind by everyone in his group, who, unlike him, were in a hurry because they wanted to win the $10,000 and be crowned champions. Even Eugene left me behind, Luke thought, sighing lightly. He walked, observing the surroundings, though there wasn't much to see. There were statues, but after looking at them for a while, they stopped being interesting. The hedged walls were very tall, over 10 meters high. The hallways were wide, and many people could comfortably walk in a horizontal line. The lighting was poor since it was night, and every now and then there were torches with weak flames that incredibly couldn't burn the vegetation walls. Thanks to his enhanced vision from his clairvoyance, the dim lighting wasn't a problem for him. This is boring, Luke thought, 5 minutes after entering. He had imagined a romantic walk through the maze with Wednesday under the moonlight, admiring the grotesque and eerie statues, but she wasn't by his side. He could have told Ajax to put them in the same group, but Wednesday had the competition with Bianca, so it would be pointless. $10,000 wouldn't hurt, Luke murmured, and in the blink of an eye, he started running at an incredible speed. If he just took a stroll, he'd only see stupid, repetitive statues. At least he would see if the traps Ajax set were a challenge. That would be more fun, and he could even win $10,000 and beat Bianca and Wednesday. It would be amusing to see their expressions when they saw him sitting on top of the chest. Luke expanded his domain. As Ajax had told him, his domain was limited. However, it wasn't useless. He could only expand it by 1 kilometer, a huge reduction from his maximum of 20 kilometers, but this was still very useful. This single kilometer allowed him to foresee traps when he encountered them, detect enemies from a distance of 1 km, anticipate changes in the environment, and even see through some walls. It wasn't bad at all. Luke decided to fly, his feet just inches from the ground. His great flying speed allowed him to catch up with some teammates who had left him behind earlier. So fast, 2 boys thought in surprise as Luke passed them, and soon they lost sight of him when he turned a corner. It was impossible for them to compete with that speed. In a few seconds, as if it were a simple game, Luke returned, barely slowing his flight as he passed in front of them before taking another path, quickly heading down a new passage. He's just trying his luck. He'll never find the right path that way, one of the boys scoffed. The method Luke was using to navigate the maze was simple. Using his 1 km domain, he eliminated the paths that didn't seem correct. Although he couldn't see the entire maze and its pathways, 1 kilometer allowed him to identify any changes that could indicate a trap or a dead-end fork, as long as the hallway wasn't extremely long. Although this method wasn't 100% effective, as seen with the path he had just chosen, which turned out to be a dead end, if he chose incorrectly, he simply retraced his steps with the same speed as before and took the other path that seemed least like a trap. Luke realized that this approach was effective, and he could see much faster progress than any of the others in his group. Despite the efficiency, his teammates only saw Luke as someone who relied purely on speed and used the option to retreat as if it were a simple trial-and-error game. They didn't understand that his domain gave him an even greater advantage. As for the traps, Luke could easily stop them with his telekinesis and the great reaction time he had trained in the Adams mansion. Among these traps were dozens of arrows or darts, floor traps that he didn't even activate since he was flying, but he detected them with his domain, and some other traps with sharp, deadly weapons. He also encountered a few statues that attacked him, but a simple telekinetic punch shattered them to pieces. In no time, Luke arrived at a larger room. This was a good sign. He was the first to arrive from his group. He didn't know if he'd cross paths with people from the other groups yet. He should, but it would be difficult. The room was large, circular in shape, with tall walls made of dense bushes. In front of him, several meters away, there was a door. The problem was a statue about 10 meters tall. The statue was of a human in armor, holding a long sword and a round shield. It seemed to have been resting there for a long time, but as soon as Luke stepped on the ground, it began to move slowly, awakening from its slumber. When the statue was about to wake up completely, Luke launched a telekinetic orb at it. Boom! The knight couldn't do anything to dodge the telekinetic orb, which, upon contact, released its telekinetic energy, causing a powerful explosion and shattering him to pieces. "Weak," Luke muttered, dodging a piece of stone that was the knight's hand with a slight tilt of his head. The telekinetic orb he sent wasn't even the most powerful one he could launch. The door, upon detecting that the knight had been defeated, trembled and opened on its own. Luke resumed his unstoppable march toward the $10,000 and beating Wednesday and Bianca. "Why are you taking this so seriously?" Ajax exclaimed indignantly, watching through a camera as his great stone knight was instantly destroyed by Luke. Now, the group moving through the northern part of the maze could pass through easily without any challenge. At first, Luke seemed to be strolling, as he had said at the beginning, but suddenly he changed his mind and began flying at a dizzying speed. His method, which seemed precarious, was very effective, putting him ahead of all the groups, surpassing Wednesday and Bianca, who were the second closest to the chest. His friend managed to get ahead, even though for 5 minutes he had been walking lazily, observing the statues. "According to my analysis, Mr. Luke got bored with the statues, so he decided to change his approach," said a young maid from the Petropolis family, standing behind Ajax. "I know, who would have thought our ancient statues would be so boring? At least I'll give the money to a friend," Ajax said, sighing. From what he saw, it was impossible for Bianca or Wednesday to keep up with Luke's pace. Wednesday was the one on his heels, but she wasn't as aggressive as him. He didn't slow down almost at any point, and he didn't care about traps or enemies. Wednesday advanced through the dark hallways. The darkness wasn't an obstacle for her, it was even an advantage. She could use the ambient darkness to attack, defend, or move more effectively, as she didn't have to exert the effort to conjure it. "The traps are getting more dangerous. That's a good sign," Wednesday thought, using the darkness around her to create a shield that defended her relentlessly from a dozen arrows. Hearing footsteps behind her, she slowly turned her head and frowned when she saw who it was. "Why are you following me? Make your own decisions," she said coldly, staring at Enid, who had managed to keep up with her all this time despite using her camouflage and moving at a speed that was anything but slow. "My decision is to follow you," Enid said with a friendly smile. She knew that the best choice to take the right paths was to follow Wednesday. Enid had no idea how to navigate a deceptive maze. She watched as Wednesday summoned small crows that flew through the hallways, seemingly giving her information. After that, she would choose a path, and it always turned out to be the right one. They never encountered dead-end paths or ones that looped in circles. Enid managed to follow Wednesday without losing sight of her thanks to her sense of smell. Her olfactory abilities couldn't be underestimated, even though the darkness was the perfect environment for Wednesday to camouflage herself. Enid stepped on a block that slowly sank into the ground. As soon as she felt the block sinking under her foot, she knew something was wrong. The sharp whistle of something cutting through the air confirmed her instinct. She quickly turned around and saw the metallic gleam of a massive axe shooting out from one of the walls, speeding toward her at a lethal pace. Her hand partially transformed into a werewolf's claw, the nails elongated into sharp talons, and the muscles tensed. She extended her arm and caught the axe mid-flight, gripping it tightly just before the blade could reach her. The push from the weapon forced her to step back several paces. She completely halted the axe's movement, the blade trembling slightly in her grip, but it didn't advance another inch. With a snort, Enid applied more force with her hand. Her fingers tightened further on the metal, and in a swift, decisive motion, she broke the axe. "What were we talking about?" Enid said, turning her gaze toward Wednesday, but there was no one there anymore. "Hey, you can't escape my sense of smell." Enid shouted, running toward a hallway that clearly had Wednesday's scent. In front of the straight hallway, Enid ran at full speed. Her speed was much greater than Wednesday's base speed, since she was a werewolf. As she exited the hallway, Enid arrived at a large circular room. She saw Wednesday's back and sighed in relief that she hadn't lost sight of her. Enid, who was about to say something to Wednesday, looked ahead. Her expression grew more serious. Throughout the enormous round room, 5 stone statues, each at least 4 meters tall, began to move slowly, their joints creaking and the sound of stone rubbing against stone echoing. Their imposing figures resembled ancient warriors, armed with swords, maces, and spears. It seemed they had to defeat them in order to proceed through the door on the other side of the room. Now that it's just the 2 of us, we'll defeat them faster. See, it's not so bad having someone follow you, Enid said. Just don't get in my way, Wednesday said dryly, conjuring her scythe of darkness. Damn it, they got the hardest middle room, Ajax complained, banging the edge of a table in frustration. The image in front of him showed the 5 statues slowly approaching Wednesday and Enid. The labyrinth was unpredictable. Its rooms and obstacles changed depending on when someone reached them. Now, they would take longer than Luke, who only faced 1 statue, albeit a larger one. Ajax had hoped that Luke would have some competition, but now his closest pursuers had encountered an obstacle that would delay them for a few crucial minutes. Don't worry, the doctors from the Petropolis mansion will tend to you soon, said the maid in a calm tone, though her gaze betrayed more impatience than compassion. In her arms, she carried a girl with multiple wounds. The most painful of them all was an arrow that had pierced through her Achilles tendon. The arrow was laced with a venom that caused a burning sensation. Sniff, sniff, why does the labyrinth have to be so dangerous? The girl sobbed, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. The master was clear about the risks, and everyone signed the contract, thought the woman, though she said nothing. You'll be good as new soon. There's even a reward for everyone, depending on how long you stayed in the labyrinth, the woman added, trying to lift the girl's spirits. Though the Petropolis family was a centuries-old lineage of Gorgons, as a mere servant, she couldn't afford to offend any of these teenagers. She didn't know all their backgrounds. This generation, weaker and weaker. In our society, there's no room for so much sensitivity. It's the result of getting too close to normies. This would never have happened in the past, she thought, shaking her head internally. However, not all was lost. Among the teenagers, there were a few standouts who had caught her attention that night. The most remarkable included Wednesday Adams, Enid Sinclair, and of course Luke Poe, with his little prank that had gone too far. The latter was the strangest of all, having spent 13 years of his life in a normie orphanage. Even so, he possessed a fierceness and ruthlessness that surpassed that of other outcasts his age. The maid walked carefully, carrying the girl with great care and caution, though she tried to move as quickly as possible. The labyrinth had a shifting and deceptive design. Traps could appear in unexpected places, and the paths could reconfigure themselves at any moment. The girl continued to sob. The maid pressed her lips together, holding back the words she wanted to say. Her only priority was to reach the exit of the labyrinth without triggering another trap and ensure that this whiny child could be healed. Suddenly, a bone-chilling roar echoed through the darkness, a powerful sound that made the ground tremble beneath the maid's feet. A figure burst out of the shadows with alarming speed. "What?" the maid murmured, her pulse racing as she instinctively stepped back. She couldn't clearly see what was rushing toward them, but her instincts screamed danger. All she could make out was a pair of glowing red eyes piercing through the darkness. Thanks to her reflexes, she managed to move in time. Stepping aside just before the spot where she had been standing was obliterated with devastating force. The unidentified creature crashed into the ground, creating a crater at the point of impact. Fragments of stone and earth flew into the air. That was close, thought the maid, cold sweat dripping down her forehead. If she hadn't moved in time, she would have been crushed, a painful death for sure. Grooar. the creature roared, making the ground tremble beneath her feet. A hide! No, the maid thought, stepping back again and narrowly dodging another collision that would have been fatal. The creature charged again. Its speed was incredible. Facing this third attack, the maid had no choice but to hurl the injured girl as far as possible from the monster. Otherwise, both of them would die. "Run!" the maid shouted, her hair suddenly transforming into snake-like shapes that hissed menacingly, their eyes fixed on the charging beast. The girl, trembling with fear, rolled on the ground and tried to get up as quickly as she could. Her foot was completely useless, and every movement was agony. As she limped away, her gaze shifted to the fierce battle between the maid and the monster. This wasn't part of the game. The creature's bloodlust made her shiver, even though she wasn't its target. The maid managed to turn the creature's muscular right forearm to stone. However, frustration was clear on her face. It wasn't enough. She needed to petrify the entire arm to neutralize it, but the petrification stopped and refused to spread further. The creature let out a deafening roar that made the air around them vibrate. The sound waves struck both the maid and the girl, causing their ears to erupt in sharp, searing pain. Both of them clutched their heads, but it was useless. The girl, still stumbling as she fled, felt a warm trickle of blood running from her ears, just like the maid, who was momentarily stunned. The monster seized the opportunity. It raised its massive arm and slammed it down hard on the Gorgon maid's arm. A sharp crack echoed through the air, and the maid was sent flying several meters back, colliding with one of the labyrinth's walls, her left arm hanging limp and useless. "Damn it, this isn't good," the maid growled through gritted teeth. She couldn't match the monster in either strength or speed. Moreover, she watched in horror as the monster abruptly flexed its muscular, petrified arm. The stone coating its skin was no more than a superficial layer. Applying force, the petrification began to crack with a dry sound, like shattering glass. The monster moved its arm, and shards of the stone layer flew through the air, falling to the ground in harmless fragments. Within seconds, the arm was completely free. "1. I'm going to die here. At least I need to buy that brat some time," thought the maid, bracing herself for the next round against the monster, which was already leaping at her with brutal force. Her only hope was that her companions from the Petropolis mansion would locate and rescue her. However, she knew that possibility was slim. The labyrinth's ever-changing design made it nearly impossible to find her quickly, even with Ajax monitoring everything through the cameras. The battle was becoming increasingly one-sided. The exchanges between the maid and the creature only highlighted the monster's growing superiority. Its speed and strength were overwhelming, and the maid was barely managing to dodge its attacks. One of her arms was completely useless, hanging lifelessly at her side, while the other was beginning to falter due to deep cuts and the constant flow of blood. Her vision was starting to blur. At least she had managed to buy a few minutes for the injured girl, who was now out of sight. The labyrinth's unpredictable design was her only advantage. In an open space, the creature, once it finished her off, would easily catch up to the girl with its speed. Suddenly, the monster roared and raised its arm, ready to deliver the final blow. The maid could barely stand, and for a moment she accepted her fate. But just as the attack seemed imminent, a sharp sound like crackling lightning tore through the air. Before the monster's strike could land, a figure appeared at astonishing speed, leaving a trail of bluish light in its wake. It was an Asian girl about 16 years old. Her hair was straight and long, divided into 2 tones. Jet black dominated most of it, with vibrant purple streaks standing out. Her hairstyle was tied into a sleek high ponytail, with straight bangs covering her forehead. It was Now Tamari, the champion of the fighting tournament. Now's leg landed squarely on the monster's face. The impact forced the creature to stumble back several meters, a less impressive effect than Now had anticipated. The monster slowly raised its head, its gaze locking onto Now. Its glowing red eyes burned brighter, and a low, guttural growl filled the air. "Great, I just made it angrier," Now muttered, her tone a mix of sarcasm and concern. "Are you all right?" asked a pale girl with long black hair and sunglasses. It was Yoko, who looked at the maid with a hint of worry upon seeing her injuries. "When did you get here?" the maid asked, a mix of confusion and relief in her voice. Besides Yoko, there were two other boys. They were the ones Luke had overtaken the first time he began flying at high speed, with one of them mocking his method. "We heard the sounds of battle, though it's incredible that despite how close we were to each other, the labyrinth managed to bring us together at this point. I guess, for once, we got lucky with this cursed shifting design," Yoko replied. "Did you come across the injured girl?" the maid asked, but before anyone could respond, several roars identical to the monster in front of them echoed near their position. "What the hell?" one of the boys murmured, swallowing hard as his expression shifted from confidence to nervousness. Facing a single monster in a 4-against-1 scenario was one thing, but taking on several of these creatures was highly dangerous, almost suicidal. The roars grew louder and more frequent. The ground began to vibrate slightly, as if the creatures were drawing closer. It was clear they weren't dealing with just one monster but several, all seemingly aware of their presence. "Run!" now shouted, raising both hands toward the monster. Without hesitation, she unleashed a large-scale electric discharge. A deafening crack tore through the air as the lightning struck the monster head-on, engulfing it in a storm of sparking bolts that spread across the area. The creature let out a roar of pain, its body momentarily immobilized as the electricity coursed through every fiber of its musculature. Now and the others took the opportunity to start running. "What the hell is going on?" Ajax exclaimed with confusion and a hint of fear. Through the cameras, he saw a horde of unidentified monsters entering through the various cardinal entrances of the labyrinth. One monster stood out more than the others. Its appearance was different from the rest, which seemed like copies with only minor differences between them. Ajax instantly knew these monsters were not from his family. First, he had never seen them in his life, and second, he saw how they brutally murdered the guards stationed at each door of the labyrinth. Boom. "We're under attack by those creatures, Master. We must evacuate," a servant shouted, running toward Ajax. The monitoring room was very close to the labyrinth, so the monsters, sensing living presences there, attacked as well. "We can't let those monsters roam freely in the labyrinth. Tell the servants to go in and start eradicating them, and someone notify my father immediately," Ajax ordered without hesitation. It would cause many problems if they died in his family's labyrinth. As for his true friends, he knew their strength would keep them safe. As for Luke and Wednesday, they were the danger to the monsters. "I need to warn Luke," Ajax thought, watching as 3 of those ugly, deformed, and muscular monsters charged toward him and his servants. Fortunately, he had a telepathic link with Luke. "But Master, your safety comes first," said an older man with white hair, a mustache, and some wrinkles. "It doesn't matter. 3 of you stay here and fight. One of you notify my father, and the rest go into the labyrinth and fight these monsters," Ajax commanded, and everyone obeyed immediately. The girl who had been speaking with Ajax earlier and the white-haired man stayed by his side, battling alongside him. A fight of 4 Gorgons versus 3 monsters ensued. "Master, if my knowledge serves me correctly, these creatures should be demons," the white-haired man said, kicking one of the monsters and sending it flying into a wall. It didn't seem to do much damage, as the monster quickly got up and charged again. "What? Demons?" Ajax and the servant girl exclaimed. "Yes, lesser demons, to be precise. This is the first time in my over 100 years of life that I've seen so many of them together," the man replied with a serious expression and a furrowed brow. "This doesn't look good," Ajax thought, watching the demons charge again. He never imagined he'd be facing the legendary demons on his birthday. "Damn it, they're so persistent," now shouted irritably, unleashing another powerful electric blast behind her, hitting 4 of the monsters chasing them. If it weren't for her lightning stunning effect, they would have been caught long ago. "We should be close to the intermediate chamber, if my memory serves me right," said a servant named Julie. She was being carried by one of the two boys. Ahead of her, Eugene was running while carrying the injured girl Julie had saved. Luckily, they had found her. Otherwise, she might have been killed by a trap in the labyrinth or by these monsters if they had encountered her. "And how can you be so sure? This place constantly changes," the other boy asked, throwing nervous glances at the dark hallways as they ran. "I've worked here long enough to learn some signs," Julie replied. "Take this," Yoko exclaimed. She raised a hand and with a swift motion, cut her palm. The blood that flowed began to float around her, transforming into sharp crimson spears that shot toward the pursuing monsters. The spears struck with force, piercing the closest creatures and momentarily slowing them down. "That should buy us some time," Yoko murmured as she rejoined the group. The cut on her hand healed quickly, thanks to her vampiric nature. Yoko and Nao's ranged attacks allowed the group to stay one step ahead of the monsters chasing them. The servant, weakly clinging to the boy carrying her, gave directions with a barely audible but determined voice. "If we reach the intermediate chamber, we can use a secret passage to lose them. But if the giant statue is still guarding the area, we'll have to avoid it," said Julie, who had managed to catch her breath. "I hope you're right, because these things don't seem like they're giving up any time soon," Nao replied, firing another electric blast that lit up the dark corridor with a blinding flash. Rather than harm them, each attack seemed to only enrage the monsters further. As they turned a sharp corner, the werewolf boy who wasn't carrying Julie stepped on a tile with a strange engraving. A loud click echoed through the air, and suddenly dozens of arrows shot out from the walls. "Watch out!" Yoko shouted, her crimson eyes glowing behind her glasses as she leapt nimbly to the side. The group scattered in the corridor, now staying close to Eugene to protect him and the girl on his back from being pierced by arrows. Yoko followed the boy carrying Julie, assisting him to avoid injury. This brief mishap and delay gave the monsters enough of an advantage to catch up. All four of them lunged at the boy who had triggered the trap, as he was in the worst position and had to dodge more arrows than the others since the trap was centered on his location. The first monster lunged at the boy with claws ready to tear him apart, but he managed to dodge at the last second, rolling desperately across the floor. However, his luck ended there. Before he could fully get back on his feet, the second monster reached him, driving its sharp claws deep into his torso, making him scream in pain. Before anyone could come to his aid, the third monster arrived, opening its massive jaws and brutally biting into the boy's neck, its fangs tearing through flesh and bone with ease. The monster let out a low growl, and with a swift and merciless motion, wrenched its jaws to the side. In an instant, the boy's head was ripped from his body, leaving a trail of blood that splattered across the walls and floor of the labyrinth. "No, Liam," his friend screamed, coming to an abrupt halt and staring at the scene with horrified eyes. One of his closest friends had just died in the most gruesome way, and his body trembled with rage and sorrow. Liam's decapitated body fell heavily to the ground. "Keep running," Now shouted, pushing Eugene forward. One thing became clear to her during this escape. With 2 injured and only 4 capable fighters, they stood no chance against these ferocious monsters, radiating a murderous intent so palpable it was overwhelming. The monsters had incredible resilience. Her electric attacks only seemed to stun them temporarily, causing no apparent harm. Even Yoko's blood spears failed to inflict any serious damage. Yoko had to shove the boy forward to get him to start running again. Despite his immense rage at witnessing his friend's death, he wasn't foolish. Charging at the 4 monsters alone would be suicide. His survival mattered. If he lived, there might be a chance for revenge in the future. Luckily for the group, the monsters stopped chasing them. Now, still running, couldn't resist casting a quick glance over her shoulder, driven by curiosity. What she saw left her confused and slightly terrified. The 4 creatures swarmed around the fallen boy's body, mercilessly tearing it apart. Their claws and jaws worked frantically, ripping chunks of flesh and bone as if they were competing for something more than mere sustenance. Suddenly, the creature's behavior shifted. The growls of satisfaction turned into furious roars. Out of nowhere, they began fighting among themselves. One of them tried to grab something in the air, as if claiming it, but another intercepted with a vicious bite. Now, unable to comprehend what was happening, turned her gaze forward, focusing on staying alive and escaping the labyrinth. 1. After a while, the monsters stopped fighting and resumed their pursuit, but the group had gained a slight lead, just enough to give them the advantage they desperately needed. Finally, they reached the intermediate chamber. Eugene, sweat dripping from his forehead, was the first to step into the room. The room was large and circular. At the far end, there was an open door. Debris from what appeared to have once been an imposing statue littered the area, but none of them paid any attention to these details. "Run in that direction," Julie exclaimed from the boy's back, pointing toward a spot that wasn't the door Luke had previously used when he defeated the knight. "You, lightning girl, go first. There should be a switch that will open the secret passage," Julie ordered, her tone urgent as she looked at Now. Now nodded and, without hesitation, took the lead, moving with incredible speed thanks to her electrokinesis. Barely seconds had passed since Now dashed ahead when one of the monsters burst into the room with an ear-splitting roar. Eugene, his heart pounding nervously, turned to face the creature. He immediately noticed it was different from the others. Its skin was reddish, as if it were boiling, in stark contrast to the bluish tone of the other creatures. With a massive leap, the monster crossed the room and landed directly in front of Now's path, blocking her way. Before she could fully react, the creature launched a colossal punch straight at her. "Damn it," Now thought, instinctively raising her hands. In the blink of an eye, a crackling shield of lightning appeared in front of her, blocking the blow. However, the impact was so powerful that the energy of her shield barely managed to absorb it. The force sent her flying backward like a rag doll, tumbling across the floor until Eugene intercepted her. "You piece of crap," Yoko shouted, charging toward the reddish monster. If they didn't get it out of the way, they wouldn't be able to use the secret passage and would have to face all the monsters in the room. Yoko conjured a long, razor-sharp spear of hardened blood. "Try dodging this," she exclaimed, thrusting the spear directly at the monster's small head, which contrasted sharply with its incredibly muscular and toned torso. The monster, however, showed no hint of fear or intent to evade. It clenched its massive fist, its claws glinting with a reddish hue, and raised it just before the spear reached it. With a brutal strike, it collided with the blood spear. For a few seconds, it seemed the two attacks were evenly matched. The spear vibrated intensely as it withstood the force of the blow, but the monster's pressure was relentless. With a sharp crack, the spear began to fracture, small fissures spreading across its surface until it finally shattered into multiple fragments that flew in all directions. After destroying the spear, the monster's fist continued its trajectory, striking Yoko. She barely managed to brace herself before being sent flying in the direction of Now and the others. Yoko was caught midair by the boy carrying Julie. "This isn't good," Eugene thought, holding on to Now as she coughed up a bit of blood. The reddish monster began to charge toward them. Eugene was at a loss for what to do. He had an injured girl on his back, and while he wanted to fight, it was impossible for him to face these monsters. Now staggered to her feet, wiping the blood dripping from the corner of her mouth. Her gaze was fixed on the monster. Eugene noticed that Now's back, though upright with determination, was trembling slightly. It wasn't from the injuries she had sustained earlier, but from the sheer ferocity and murderous intent emanating from the monster. Just as the monster raised its fist to strike Now, a flash appeared out of nowhere. A blur moved at a speed none of them could clearly follow. Before the monster's fist could connect with Now, the blur collided directly with its face with devastating force. The sound of the impact echoed like an explosion, releasing a shockwave that shook everything around them. the once unstoppable monster was sent flying like a rag doll. Its body careened across the room before crashing violently against the wall of the labyrinth. "I made it in time," murmured the one responsible for sending the monster flying. Eugene barely managed to react, his eyes darting between the fallen monster and the blur that was now slowly coming to a stop, revealing Luke standing calmly in front of them. "Luke," Eugene, Yoko, and now said in unison, each with different emotions but sharing one: relief. "Demons," thought Luke with a serious expression, watching as the reddish creature slowly got to its feet, dazed from the blow. Ajax sent him a telepathic message, informing him that lesser demons were attacking the labyrinth. He asked Luke to help the others so that as few people as possible would die, and Luke agreed, because that's what friends do. Luke glanced back. Behind the now, Eugene, and the others, 3 more demons were approaching, running as if their prey might escape at any moment and they'd miss out on a delicious feast. The 3 demons looked identical in appearance. They had a grotesque, semi-alien humanoid form and stood about 4 meters tall. Their bodies were massive and muscular, with a shiny blue viscous skin tone. Their eyes were red, glowing with malevolent and intimidating energy. Their mouths were small, filled with sharp teeth. Their arms were long and muscular, ending in large hands with sharp claws, and their bulky torsos were hunched forward. Their legs were thin compared to the rest of their bodies, but ended in feet with black claws. The demon Luke had struck was the same, except its skin color was a fiery red instead of bright blue, as if it were in a berserker mode, with muscles that seemed ready to burst. "We need to move," Eugene said. They were caught in the midst of Luke's impending battle with the demons. He knew he couldn't help his friend, and that the best course of action was to get the wounded away from the battlefield. Yes, Eugene already considered Luke his first male friend, although he didn't know if Luke saw him the same way. He had helped him to win over now and overcome his fears. He felt a great improvement in his strength thanks to the fighting tournament. "We won't make it in time," Julie murmured from behind the brown-haired boy, who was still shaken by his friend's death and wasn't in the best condition for battle. "We'll protect." Before Yoko, who had just stood up moments ago with blood at the corner of her mouth, could finish her sentence, Luke said, "Shambles." Eugene, Yoko, now, and the others vanished from where they stood and reappeared at the far end of the chamber, far from the monsters and Luke. "What?" Julie murmured to herself, confused by the sudden teleportation. The others were equally surprised. Few people knew about the techniques Luke used in battle. Most who had witnessed them didn't live to tell the tale. Luke, seeing the 3 demons leaping toward him and shattering the stone floor of the labyrinth, created a powerful circular barrier around his body, a barrier capable of withstanding 10 tons of force. The demon's claws struck Luke's translucent barrier. The impact resounded loudly, and the air seemed to vibrate from the sheer force of the collision. However, the barrier remained unbroken. The effect didn't stop there. The barrier not only absorbed the strength of their attacks, but also released a shockwave in response to the impact. In an instant, the 3 demons were violently repelled backward, as if struck by an invisible explosion. Luke didn't stop there. Before the berserker demon could reach him, he had to take out one of the other 3. He extended his arm, aiming at the blue demon on the right. The demon, still in midair, felt a powerful force gripping it. Suddenly, that force began pulling it upward at a dizzying speed. The creature roared, struggling to break free, but Luke's telekinetic strength far surpassed its physical power. It could do nothing but ascend, rising higher and higher away from the ground. "Down," Luke murmured, making a sharp downward motion with his arm. The demon began to plummet at a devastating speed, like a guided meteor, incapable of stopping its fall. The blue demon's head struck the ground with immense force, creating a crater upon impact. The violence of the collision pulverized its head and most of its torso, leaving behind only an unrecognizable mess of blood and crushed bones. The only thing left was the lower half of its body, impaled upside down in the ground. The other two demons managed to stabilize themselves after Luke's previous attack. They glanced at the remains of their fallen companion, then shifted their gaze back to Luke, this time watching him with more caution than before. Seems they're not mindless beasts, Luke thought. After all, most creatures have a basic instinct for survival or caution. "What the hell?" murmured the boy carrying Julie on his back. His group had struggled just to keep the demons at bay, but Luke had taken out one of these violent creatures in a matter of moments, and he was facing all of them alone. "So fast," Julie, the maid, murmured, her eyes wide as she watched the scene. "Looks like I'll live another day," Eugene murmured, sighing in relief as he witnessed Luke's strength firsthand. He had always heard rumors but never imagined he would be this powerful. He had always considered Wednesday the strongest and most intimidating psychic in their class, but was she really? After seeing Luke's display of strength, he began to doubt whether she could defeat him. "Amazing," Now said, looking at Luke with shining eyes, completely unfazed by the shattered remains of the demon's body. Eugene glanced at her but said nothing. As for Yoko, she was surprised but remained silent. She simply wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth and straightened up, ready to help in the fight. She refused to be a useless bystander. Now shared the same determination. Covering her body in electricity, she began running toward Luke alongside Yoko. "We'll handle these two normal ones, Luke," Now shouted, sending a powerful bolt of lightning at one of the demons. Yoko attacked the other with a massive hammer made of blood. Both of them knew from the earlier exchange that the red berserker demon was far stronger than they were, so they left it to Luke. Luke nodded, satisfied that the people he was saving weren't cowards waiting helplessly on the sidelines. As for Eugene, Luke knew he wasn't the most useful in a fight, but he watched as the boy carefully placed the injured girl on the ground before running toward Now and Yoko. He's grown, Luke thought, as if he were watching a pet grow older, becoming stronger and more capable. He made a mental note to tell Wednesday about this later. Thinking of Wednesday, Luke decided to send her a telepathic message. He trusted his girlfriend's strength. She was the danger. Lesser demons would need sheer luck not to cross paths with her, but he wanted to stay in communication given the unusual circumstances. Demons weren't a common occurrence. Stranger than a hide, it was bizarre that so many had appeared. As for their attack, it was typical of these vile creatures to assault anything they saw once they emerged. "Hey, lesser demons have appeared, according to Ajax. This is my first time fighting them, so I don't have a clear visual reference. I'm facing 4 here. I've already killed one. Have you run into any?" Luke asked while creating another shield that lightly pushed back the red demon, which was growing increasingly enraged. Wednesday, who had just vanished into her own shadow, received Luke's telepathic message without losing focus. She emerged from the shadow of a demon that failed to react in time, slicing its head off with her scythe of darkness. "Finally, your damned neck," Wednesday murmured, watching the ugly demon head fly through the air before hitting the ground. It had taken several cumulative strikes to the demon's neck before its tough skin gave way, allowing her to sever the head from the body. "Yes, I'm already fighting them. There are 5 here. I've killed one. A fantastic evening." Wednesday responded to Luke as she surveyed the destruction in the chamber. The Guardian Knight statues lay shattered, their pieces scattered across the hall. Wednesday and Enid had cleared the area of other threats, but just as they were about to step through the threshold of the door, 5 demons arrived. "Get back!" Enid shouted, delivering a powerful kick to a demon's large stomach, sending it flying. Her leg had partially transformed, enhancing her strength. By getting rid of this demon, Enid's gaze quickly shifted to the one she had already weakened with several strikes. With a fierce roar, she charged at it, her right arm partially transforming. The demon swung its massive claws at her, but Enid dodged with agility and countered with a swift, forceful move. She leaped onto the demon, positioning herself atop its head, and drove her claws directly into its skull. The demon roared in fury and pain, thrashing wildly in an attempt to throw her off, but Enid's strength was overwhelming. She crushed the demon's head, which collapsed under her weight. Another one down, 3 left, thought Wednesday, her cold, calculating eyes locking onto the remaining creatures. 2 of them were similar to the ones they had just killed, but the third was different. This third demon barely stood 1.3 meters tall. Its thin, gaunt body starkly contrasted with the others' robust forms. Its bluish, slimy skin clung tightly to its bones, making it even more repulsive than the rest. Despite its ugly and insignificant appearance, it radiated an unsettling aura of danger. It hadn't attacked or shown any intention of doing so. Instead, it lingered on the sidelines, occasionally emitting guttural sounds. This made Wednesday realize the demon had some level of intelligence, suggesting it might be on the verge of evolving into an intermediate demon, which meant it was likely stronger than the other lesser demons. "Do you need me to come?" Luke asked, concerned upon learning Wednesday was facing 4 demons. "No, I'm with Enid, though that's irrelevant. Her strength is useful, so I don't need help," Wednesday replied. "Is Eugene with you?" she asked. "Yes, don't worry, I won't let him die," Luke assured her, putting Wednesday at ease. She could now fully focus on the thrilling life-and-death battle before her. "Hey, old man, wake up," said Luke telepathically to Edgar while dodging a punch from the reddish demon with incredible precision. Luke always wore the necklace. It had become a kind of habit since the ghost of his great-great-grandfather started living there. "Is he fighting at close range?" thought Julie, the servant, surprised to see Luke's fighting style. She knew he had an aura of clairvoyance. Rumors of his 3 auras had been circulating for some time, but it was still rare to see a telekinetic fighting in close combat. As for the boy who had carried her here, he had gone to help in the fight against the 2 bluish demons. Now it was Yoko, Eugene, and him versus the 2 demons. "What's going on?" asked Edgar. Luke heard his voice for the first time in several days, as Edgar had been busy trying to locate the Poe soul weapon. Given the situation of facing minor demons for the first time, Luke didn't notice Edgar's weary tone. "I'm facing minor demons," Luke responded, sending a mental command to the reddish demon to stop. It obeyed for a second. That 1-second advantage was enough for Luke to land a telekinetic blow to the demon's stomach. Its belly rumbled, and then, propelled by the telekinetic force, it was sent flying backward. "It has a brain, that's good," thought Luke as he noticed that his mental command had worked. He figured that since they were beasts fighting almost entirely on instinct, they might not be very intelligent, making his blue aura less useful. "That's unexpected. How many?" asked Edgar in a surprised tone. 4, but I already killed one. One of them turned red, unlike the blue color of the others. Also, they aren't the only demons. Wednesday is fighting more, Luke replied. From Luke's necklace, Edgar's ghostly form emerged, returning to the real world after some time. Luke gave Edgar a quick glance, noticing that his appearance seemed tired, odd for a ghost. It looked like he was putting in a lot of effort to find the soul weapon. "They're Morax, the weakest of all minor demons. There are many of them, and they all look alike. They have a beast-like intellect, and their main strength is their physical power and endurance," said Edgar, observing the demons. "Is the reddish one the same? It's stronger than the others," asked Luke, as the reddish demon charged toward him. Luke raised his hand and used his 10 tons of telekinetic force to try to crush it. The stone ground beneath the demon cracked and sank slightly, but to Luke's surprise, the creature kept moving forward, although its speed decreased significantly. The reddish Morak resisted the pressure with a guttural roar, its body trembling from the strain. It's in a berserker mode, so to speak. That happens when they've recently consumed a soul. They become stronger, more resilient, even able to withstand 10 tons, though just barely, Edgar explained. Do they attack in packs or usually go alone? Luke continued his impromptu lesson on these lesser demons. As the Morak approached him slowly, each of its steps making the ground beneath it creak under its weight, Luke began concentrating telekinetic waves in his index finger to form a telekinetic orb. The pressure that had been crushing the demon lessened slightly due to Luke shifting his focus, allowing the Morak to gain some speed. However, it was still slow, giving Luke the time he needed to complete the formation of the telekinetic orb. No, Moraks rarely attack in packs. They're too basic to coordinate. If you see several acting together, it can only mean one thing, Edgar responded, a note of unease in his voice. What thing? Asked Luke, continuing to concentrate telekinetic waves and waiting for the precise moment to release the orb. There's a controller Morak nearby. It's rare, but every now and then one appears that has developed enough intelligence to lead others. It's a sign of imminent evolution, Edgar replied. Will it become an intermediate demon? Asked Luke more seriously. If a reddish Morak could endure 10 tons and keep moving, an intermediate demon would be far stronger and smarter. They had to eliminate it before it evolved. Yes, it must be watching and directing the others. Still, with your strength, you could take it down, especially if you have help from your goth girlfriend, Edgar replied with a shrug. Luke had already fought Crackstone, who had made a deal with a greater demon. He could handle a potential case of a newly evolved intermediate demon with relative confidence. If I can find it, Luke said, frowning slightly. With his clairvoyance nerfed in this labyrinth, it would be difficult to locate it. He didn't want any of his loved ones to be in danger. His greatest concern was Wednesday, though considering her strength, she was the one he should worry about the least. Yet, she was the most important person to him, and he didn't want to take even the slightest risk. The telekinetic orb on his finger glowed with a blinding light. With a swift motion, he launched it directly at the reddish Morak. The orb struck its chest, creating an explosion of energy that sent it flying several meters back, leaving it motionless on the ground. On its muscular chest, a hole oozed thick, almost black blood. Luke was about to send a telepathic message to Wednesday when he noticed the Morak struggling to stand again. Seeing a dangerous gleam in the Morak's eyes, he used his precognition ability, revealing a fragment of the immediate future. The Morak roared furiously, unleashing a powerful sonic attack that rippled across the battlefield. Yoko, now Eugene, and the other boy, who were fighting the other demons, were hit directly by the sonic wave. They screamed in pain and fell to the ground, vulnerable. That momentary weakness created a fatal opening, allowing the other 2 demons to attack them mercilessly. As for Luke, he wasn't in any danger. He could defend himself with a telekinetic shield. Tish! Luke clicked his tongue and launched himself toward the Morak at high speed, propelling himself with a telekinetic explosion that shot him forward like a bolt. When he finally closed the distance, he leaped into the air with agility and precision. His leg became enveloped in telekinetic energy, compressed more and more, emitting a faint hum that signaled the buildup of power. Luke twisted his body midair, using the torque to deliver a devastating kick directly to the Morak's face. The impact was instantaneous. His leg collided with the demon's skull, and the accumulated telekinetic waves were released in a concentrated explosion. Boom! The sound of the impact echoed through the air as the Morak's face deformed under the force of the blow. The Morak's body was sent flying backward, crashing to the ground with a dull thud. Its head tilted at an impossible angle, leaving no doubt that the strike had been fatal. Luke landed gracefully, his leg still emitting faint flickers of residual energy as the air around him returned to normal. Phew, that future was dangerous, Luke thought, relieved. Dangerous for the others, not for him. The reddish hue of the Morak began to fade until it returned to its usual bluish color, and it moved no more. Luke was grateful not to have faced an enemy with superhuman regenerative abilities. It was always a hassle. With his back turned to Now and the others, Luke didn't notice the looks they gave him, or the stunned expressions on the faces of the remaining 2 demons, as they witnessed the brutal and swift death of their colleague. Hey, Wednesday, are you facing a demon different from the others? Something strange or notable at first glance? Luke asked, attempting to sound casual, though Wednesday immediately detected the worry in his tone. There was a brief silence on the connection before Wednesday responded in her usual monotone, emotionless voice. "What exactly do you mean?" Luke quickly explained to Wednesday what Edgar had told him. As for how he knew such things out of nowhere, Wednesday was already aware of Edgar's existence. Luke trusted her enough to tell her about him, and with her keen observational skills, she would have figured it out eventually and already had her suspicions. "No, there's no different demon. Just the same ugly, muscular blue ones," Wednesday said, lying, as standing in front of her was a short, scrawny demon with eyes full of cunning, observing her with an intensity she hadn't seen in the other Morax. Wednesday lied because she knew Luke. If she told him that demon was there, he'd come to help her, especially to ensure there was no chance anything bad could happen to her. An almost obsessive concern for her, something she liked a lot but not right now. This fight was hers, and if Luke came, she'd lose the chance to have an exciting battle. Luke frowned for a moment, sensing something odd in Wednesday's response, but decided to let it slide. "All right, I'll keep searching while I rescue people. But let me know if you need help or anything," Luke said. Wednesday rolled her eyes, though a small smile appeared on her lips. "Sure, Luke. Now stop worrying and focus on what's in front of you. I can handle myself." Wednesday and Enid had managed to kill 2 normal Morax. 2 regular ones, and the short, scrawny demon remained. A demon with intelligence and an imminent evolution. Interesting, thought Wednesday as she dodged a powerful kick from a Morak, then struck at the heels of her enemy with her scythe. It was the 3rd blow she had delivered to that part of the body, and she finally managed to pierce the skin, eliciting a pained growl from the demon and causing it to stumble. Enid appeared like a flash, taking advantage of the opportunity Wednesday had created. With her hands, she grabbed the demon's injured heel and lifted it completely off the ground. Even though Enid's hands weren't large or muscular, they possessed immense physical strength that would defy logic for a normie. After lifting it, Enid slammed the demon against the ground. The impact echoed through the air as the Morak growled, its body colliding violently with the stone floor of the labyrinth. But it didn't end there. Enid lifted it once more and smashed it against the ground again. She repeated the process, each time with greater intensity. Wednesday had stepped back to avoid the debris. Enid stopped when she saw the other demon closing in on her. Without hesitation, she launched herself with force, grabbed the Morak by the heel again, and with an explosive twist of her body, hurled it. Morak against Morak, they collided with a sickening crunch of bones and flesh. Her strength has increased, thought Wednesday, though not entirely surprised. What truly surprised her, even if her expression didn't show it, was the brutality Enid had demonstrated tonight. Her suspicions were practically confirmed, and it was something she found far from amusing. The 2 Morax got back up. The one Enid and Wednesday had beaten several times was in a pitiful state, but still wasn't dead, though its death was imminent. Even so, it charged at them again, as if it didn't care about dying. Its survival instinct is terrible, though that makes them more brutal, thought Wednesday as she launched herself at both Morax, her dark scythe in hand. Working together, Wednesday and Enid didn't take long to kill the 2 Morax. The small, lesser demon continued watching, as if it didn't care about the death of its subordinates, or whatever they were to it. "It just watched 2 of its own die," Enid remarked, shaking her hand in the air to fling off the black blood from the 2 demons. That's the downside of fighting with your fists. However, Enid didn't show any expression of disgust, only indifference, which caught Wednesday's attention. She didn't comment on it, though. "They're demons. It's expected that they lack any sense of camaraderie," Wednesday said coldly, staring at the small, ugly demon, which began to smile. Its grin stretched across most of its face, revealing its sharp, tiny teeth, which seemed to number many. "Its intelligence isn't much to speak of," thought Wednesday, slightly disappointed. She had expected a greater intellect from this quasi-evolved demon. "Demons? How do you know that?" Enid asked, surprised by this revelation. "Luke told me. If you didn't know, we have a telepathic bond," Wednesday replied indifferently. Enid made a barely visible grimace when she heard Wednesday's response. "Oh, right. Why are you telling me this now?" she asked, slightly indignant. They had been fighting for several minutes, and it would have been nice to know they were up against damn demons. "Was it really necessary for me to tell you? I mean, it's not like knowing changes anything," Wednesday replied, causing Enid to frown slightly. It had been a while since she'd heard Wednesday's biting responses. They had to stop talking as the small Morak started to move. Its speed was incredible, much faster than the other two. It reached Wednesday in an instant and struck at her stomach with its small but muscular leg. With sharpened reflexes, Wednesday conjured a dark shield at the last second to block the blow. The barrier absorbed the impact, but the Morak's power pushed her back with such violence that she couldn't avoid being displaced several meters. Wednesday planted her feet on the stone ground, gradually coming to a stop about 15 meters away. Its speed is far superior to the others, but its physical strength is the same, thought Wednesday, quickly analyzing the small demon's strength. Enid didn't stay still. She moved her leg, aiming for the demon's head. It jumped vertically, dodging the kick, but that wasn't all Enid had in mind. Now she sent a right hook. "You can't dodge this now," thought Enid, already seeing her punch shattering the demon's ugly face while it was midair and had no way to avoid it, or so she thought. In an incredibly fast move, the Morak twisted its torso midair, performing a kind of somersault while still jumping. It slid to the side with an unnatural grace, allowing Enid's punch to pass by. "How?" thought Enid, surprised. The Morak landed on the ground and was about to charge at Enid when it quickly recoiled. In its place, 3 dark spears impacted the ground, shattering it. Its agility and reflexes are also far superior to the other demons, thought Wednesday, her pale hand slightly extended toward the Morak. The previous Moraks were fast, yes, but their speed was raw and uncontrolled, driven solely by their immense physical strength. Their movements were clumsy and predictable. However, this Morak was completely different. Although it had the same physical strength, its speed wasn't a product of overwhelming force. Rather, it was the result of perfect synchronization between its muscles and reflexes. Its agility was fluid. "If that's all, I give it about 15 minutes to live," thought Wednesday as her dark scythe grew larger, especially the blade, which extended longer. "Transform, Enid," said Wednesday as she sank into her own shadow and appeared behind the Morak, starting close combat. Enid nodded and began her full transformation. If they were demons, and this one was slightly more intelligent, they needed to eradicate it as soon as possible. Wednesday wouldn't play around and would try to kill it as quickly and efficiently as possible, even if she had to use Enid's help, Luke's ex-girlfriend. With Enid in her full werewolf form, and Wednesday being precisely mortal, even the fast Morak began to find itself at a disadvantage and accumulating injuries. It only lightly wounded Enid, who, with her werewolf regeneration, quickly healed. As for Wednesday, the Morak couldn't land a single blow on her, as she was too elusive in the darkness of the place. The Morak, which had previously appeared calm and even enjoyed the others fighting with guttural sounds of satisfaction, was now becoming increasingly angry. It no longer smiled, and its guttural sounds were now full of rage. 10 minutes into the fight, it realized that its life was in danger, unlike the other demons. It needed to flee, but it couldn't do so, not when 2 delicious souls stood before it. 2 powerful souls with an irresistible scent. With a new idea in mind, the Morak began to circle Enid and Wednesday. Its speed was so fast that it seemed as though there were many clones of it. Wednesday and Enid started to retreat cautiously. They had to be careful if it tried a final, desperate move. Their backs touched, or more precisely, Wednesday's head was against Enid's waist, since in her werewolf form, Enid was very tall. Suddenly, Wednesday's eyes turned white. She was having a sudden vision. However, she didn't lose consciousness. She stood there with her eyes white but still standing. She had trained enough to not lose consciousness for a few seconds if she suddenly had a vision. Wednesday saw many images in a few seconds. First, a sign that read Sunnyvale. Then, a forest scene from above. The forest wasn't in the best condition. It seemed there had been a fierce battle there. Then, she zoomed in on the forest to a specific area. In what seemed to be a crater created by the battle, there was a body lying there. She recognized the body immediately. Enid, thought Wednesday, recognizing the characteristic blonde hair with pink streaks and her features. The only difference was that her usually joyful and lively expression was now pale, with lifeless eyes. After seeing Enid's lifeless body, Wednesday returned to reality, unable to see anything else. Her eyes stopped being white, and she noticed that the Morak was still doing the same thing, but this time it was screeching, a very irritating sound, but one that Wednesday didn't pay any attention to. Will Enid die in the future, in Sunnyvale? Thought Wednesday, puzzled, something that didn't happen to her often. Wednesday stopped thinking about that sudden vision and the omen of Enid's death. 2 more Moraks arrived on the battlefield. It seems he called them with that horrible screech, commented Enid, speaking in her full werewolf form. Wednesday nodded slightly. As the 2 Moraks arrived, the small Morak stopped spinning, took some distance from the 2 of them, and stared at them. Suddenly, it made an indescribable sound to Wednesday and Enid, and one of the newly arrived Moraks launched an attack. The other stayed by the side of the small Morak, who seemed to have the ability to lead them. While Wednesday and Enid fought against the attacking Morak, they noticed something out of the corner of their eyes that startled them and was definitely not a good sign. The small Morak began devouring the other Morak with great ferocity and speed, a scene far from pleasant to witness. "We have to stop whatever it's trying to do," exclaimed Enid. Wednesday nodded, and both began to fight with more intensity. In a short time, they managed to send the attacking Morak flying far away from them. They fixed their eyes on the small Morak, but it was already too late. It had completely devoured the other demon, and now its tiny body was trembling and starting to change color. Its skin began to take on a reddish hue, and its muscles grew more robust. It turned the same reddish color as the Morak that fought against Luke, Wednesday thought, relieved to see that the demon hadn't evolved by consuming its companion, but had merely entered a sort of berserker mode. Luke had warned her to be cautious if a Morak had reddish skin, as they were more ferocious and stronger, but Edgar had said it didn't mean they had evolved. Groer. The small reddish Morak screeched with far greater power than its peers. A sound wave began to spread from its position in the direction of Wednesday and Enid. Wednesday managed to create a dome of darkness that completely enveloped her, shielding her from the sonic attack. Enid wasn't as lucky. It was impossible to outrun a sonic attack that traveled much faster than her running speed. The wave struck her, causing immense pain in her head, and she felt blood begin to seep from her wolf ears. The attack was far more excruciating for her due to her heightened sense of hearing as a werewolf, far more developed than that of other outcast species. The small Morak launched itself toward Wednesday, its instincts telling it that her soul was the most delicious and exclusive. It also harbored greater rage toward her, having been unable to land a single hit throughout the fight. Wednesday was startled by the Morak's sudden increase in speed, but before she could react, she vanished from the spot. In her place appeared Luke, his palm extended outward. Around Luke's palm, the air vibrated intensely. He had condensed telekinetic waves to a critical level. Void edge, Luke thought as he made a slashing motion with his hand. The accumulated pressure was released explosively forward, creating a blade that cut through space at overwhelming speed. Directly in the path of the telekinetic blade was the Morak, moving too fast to evade the attack. It hadn't anticipated its prey disappearing and someone else taking her place. However, it didn't seem upset. The scent of the boy in front of it was far more enticing than that of the previous human woman. It had never smelled a soul with such an intoxicating aroma. Thus, it didn't care about the blade coming its way. The Morak crossed its small reddish arms in an X shape and continued forward. The blade struck its crossed forearms. The sound was sharp and dry, like a knife slicing through fine silk. Both of the Morak's arms were cleanly severed at the forearms, falling to the ground with a dull thud and a thick spray of dark blood. The Morak didn't have enough time to register what had happened. The blade didn't stop after amputating its forearms. Its path continued, cutting through the area just below the chest. The cut split the Morak from the base of its chest, separating the upper section of its body from the rest. The demon didn't even have time to make a sound. The upper half of its body hit the ground, followed by its small legs, which collapsed with a hollow thump. A thick pool of black blood spread beneath the remains of the demon, its face frozen in a mix of surprise and unfulfilled hunger. Luke turned his attention to the other Morak and noticed that now Yoko and other people he had rescued from the labyrinth had arrived. They were handling it, along with Enid, who had already recovered from the sonic attack. He quickly began to fly. He had used shambles to switch places with Wednesday, and since he had been flying, she was now plummeting from a great height. Fortunately, he would make it in time to catch her. He knew perfectly well that she was more than capable of landing without a scratch, but that didn't matter to him. He had put her in that situation, and he wanted to make amends. When he was just inches away from catching her, Luke noticed a change in the air. Wednesday, with impressive agility, twisted her body mid-descent, aiming her boots directly at Luke's face. What the hell is she doing? Luke thought. With a quick movement, he dodged Wednesday's landing kick by leaning to the side and catching her around the waist at the same moment. "Why are you trying to use my face as a landing pad?" Luke asked, holding Wednesday's body against his. "I told you telepathically that I didn't need your help. That ugly creature was my prey," Wednesday replied in a slightly annoyed tone, crossing her arms while Luke maintained his flight. "I know. You also told me you weren't facing anything unusual. A lie, since that small demon was the controller," Luke said accusingly. "I know. I lied because if I'd told you the truth, you would have flown over at full speed and wouldn't have let me fight alone," Wednesday said, clearly irritated. "Don't you want to fight as a team?" Luke asked as he gently landed on the ground, still not letting go of Wednesday's waist. "Fighting as a team is necessary when we face a real threat," Wednesday replied, her tone firm and full of irritation. "In this case, we could each handle our own fights. I'm not a princess who needs rescuing, yet you interfered in my battle." That wasn't just any enemy. It was a demon, and not just that, a controller. It had to be eliminated as quickly as possible. Besides, I'd already finished my fights and even saved a few people along the way, Luke said, as if his reasoning were indisputable. Wednesday narrowed her eyes, her frown deepening. "Oh, of course," Wednesday said in a dangerously calm tone, pulling herself free from his grip with a sharp motion. "You finished your fights, saved the day, and decided I was being too slow, is that it?" "That's not what I meant," Luke said, realizing too late that he'd only made things worse. "Of course it is. I wanted to enjoy that fight, to feel the risk, not have my obsessive boyfriend show up and ruin it because he thought I was taking too long," Wednesday shot back, her tone biting and full of reproach. "Obsessive boyfriend?" Luke repeated, a slight twitch in his eye. He had only been showing concern for his girlfriend. Plus, he had eliminated a controller demon on the verge of evolving. His decision to intervene was the most logical and effective. Why was the always rational and logical Wednesday making such a scene? "Snap out of it, kid," said Edgar, who was flying beside Luke. He had come out when Luke mentioned the small red Morak, curious to see a controller demon with his own eyes after so long. "What?" Luke asked, confused. Maybe his great-great-grandfather could shed some light on the situation. The reason for her annoyance is easy to figure out. Your intervention shows that you don't fully trust her ability to handle the situation on her own. You hurt her pride. You arrived and killed the demon with a single attack, and on top of that, you completely removed her from the scene with your teleportation technique, Edgar explained. Now Luke understood. With Wednesday's pride and ego, this was clearly a blow to her, especially coming from him. Even though his actions were motivated by his desire to protect her, no matter how slim the risk, not because he doubted her strength. As Wednesday had said, it was a kind of obsession, and if he could reduce risks, he would. Wednesday had already turned her back on Luke and was walking toward the door of the chamber to leave the labyrinth. She knew that with the demon's attack, the game would be cancelled, so she planned to return to the Petropolis mansion to sleep and head for Ohio in the morning. Before that, I need to talk to Enid, Wednesday thought, recalling her earlier vision and formulating a new idea. Luke, who was about to follow Wednesday to continue the discussion, was intercepted by now. "Luke, we already killed that demon. Should we keep looking for more of them?" Now asked with a smile, as if they were hunting butterflies. This reached Wednesday's ears just as she was about to step through the threshold of the ancient stone door. She stopped and slowly turned her head. First, she looked at Now, who didn't notice her gaze, and then at Luke, who was already watching her. "Oh, this just gets worse," Luke thought. "I can't. Go on your own. I need to do something else," Luke responded quickly, hurrying after Wednesday, who had resumed walking upon hearing Luke decline Now's invitation. Along the way, he managed to convince Wednesday to climb onto his back so they could fly through the labyrinth. That way, they would reach the entrance much faster and could check if there were any loose demons along the way. Luke was in the room Ajax had prepared for him to spend the night. It was nearly 5 in the morning. Just a few minutes ago, he had emerged from the labyrinth. He had met Ajax, his family members, and the servants. It was clear that a battle had taken place, but the situation was now under control. The demons that had attacked Ajax had been eliminated, as well as those in the labyrinth. The Petropolis family had responded quickly to the disaster and were able to navigate the labyrinth better than most, though not with complete accuracy. As a result, there were persons that could not be saved. More than 100 teenagers had attended Ajax's birthday party. Over 50% of them had signed up for the game, with around 70 participants in total. Out of those 70 participants, there were 14 deaths, approximately 20%, and many more injuries, with the wounded being treated. When Luke exited the labyrinth, he saw servants carrying lifeless bodies on stretchers, a grim and haunting sight. "Those bastards must have been behind this," Luke said through gritted teeth, kicking the bed. He restrained his strength, otherwise he might have broken the luxurious wooden frame, and he had no intention of paying for it. "It's possible. They have 2 of the 6 main demonic books. It wouldn't be far-fetched to think they have a method to control demons or at least guide them," said Natasha, who had been alerted by Luke about the sudden demon attack, an event far from ordinary. As for Wednesday, she had stormed off to a different room, still upset with Luke for interfering in her fight. "We need to accuse them. I arrive at the Petropolis mansion, and more than 10 demons led by a controller attack. Last year, they tried to revive Crackstone, a demonic normie. Their reputation isn't what it used to be. There might be people who would believe it," Luke said, unwilling to let this go unpunished, even though he had no concrete evidence that the Spellmans were behind the attack. "It won't do any good without evidence. Remember that demons travel between dimensions. They can appear out of nowhere and attack mindlessly. That's what lesser demons do, especially," said Natasha, shaking her head. "But they carried out a suicide attack. Isn't it strange for their survival instincts to be so dulled? They charged into a place full of outcasts and were wiped out in less than an hour," Luke countered. "From what is known about lesser demons, when they travel between dimensions, they appear at random points. They don't have precise control over their spatial travel abilities. Moraks have a beast-like intellect. If they appear in a place full of delicious food, they'll attack without hesitation. Even the small Morak close to evolving, these creatures' hunger outweighs their survival instincts, at least for lesser demons," Natasha explained. "You should give me a class explaining everything about demons," Luke muttered with a grimace of frustration. He was annoyed by learning about them piecemeal through scattered lessons whenever the topic came up. "Wait, if they can't control where they appear, how did more than 10 of them manage to show up here and move as a pack? I know the small Morak is the controller, but can it make them all travel to the same point?" Luke asked. The small Morak doesn't have full control over dimensional travel, but it does possess a unique ability that sets it apart. Being close to evolving, it can generate a specific resonance in dimensional energy, like a sort of beacon that other demons can sense. This resonance acts like a magnet, aligning their travels. While they don't arrive at the exact same point, they appear close enough to regroup quickly, Natasha explained patiently. Oh, what Wednesday told me, Luke thought, recalling that Wednesday had briefly mentioned, albeit angrily, that at one point the small Morak made a strange noise, and 2 Moraks arrived at its location. Demon talk is over. Pack your things, we're heading to Ohio right now, Natasha said, and Luke looked at her in surprise. Now, it's almost 5 in the morning and I haven't slept, Luke complained. So what? Now that the entire Petropolis mansion is awake, more and more people will show up because of the demon attack, worried parents, council members. It's the perfect time to leave without being noticed by anyone, Natasha said. You're right, are we taking the Audi? Luke asked. No, it's too flashy and they probably already know it's the car we use. We'll go on foot, or rather, we'll fly the first stretch to get away from the Petropolis mansion. With Wednesday's stealth ability, no one will see us, Natasha replied. It'll be tough flying with 2 people on my back, Luke murmured. Your back is big. Let Wednesday share a bit, Natasha said with a slight teasing smile, patting Luke on the shoulder. But first, leave a letter for your friend. Tell him to send the bodies of the demons you and Wednesday killed to the Adams Manor. Those bodies are worth a lot of money, Natasha added. Oh, really? How much? Luke asked, his face lighting up at the mention of a lot of money. At least hundreds of thousands of dollars. The small Morak alone could easily surpass $1 million, Natasha replied. Demon corpses had many uses, research, experiments, weapons, rituals, and more. That's a lot of money, Luke thought, a grin forming on his face. He quickly grabbed paper and a pencil to leave Ajax a note. The least the Petropolis family could do was handle the transport of the demons that Luke and Wednesday had killed to Adams Manor. After that, he sent a telepathic message to Wednesday, letting her know they were leaving immediately. He mentioned they would find at the servant's house, which was empty since everyone was occupied with the demon attack, the injured, and the dead. Beforehand, Luke and Natasha headed to the Audi to grab their bags and backpacks, though they didn't have much luggage. The most important items were potions and all the fake documentation for their new identities. Wednesday was walking near the labyrinth when she arrived at the monitoring room Ajax had used earlier to watch everyone in the maze. The room now had a large hole in one of its walls and was being used to treat the injured. Servants and wounded teenagers were coming and going. The number of injuries from the labyrinth and the demons was very high, not to mention the deaths. At that moment, she received a telepathic message from Luke, informing her they were leaving the mansion immediately, as it was better to slip away unnoticed while everyone was distracted by the attack, a suggestion from Natasha. Fine, grab my backpack and bag. I'll meet you in a bit, Wednesday replied curtly. Aren't you coming with us to the Audi? We'll grab the stuff and leave directly, Luke asked. I'll meet you at the servant's house, Wednesday said, without offering any explanation. Luke didn't press her, knowing she was still upset with him. Wednesday stepped through the hole into the monitoring room. She noticed many stretchers with injured people being treated. It didn't take long for her to find what she was looking for. Blonde hair with pink tips. It was Enid. Enid was volunteering, helping the servants with the injured, something expected of her. Wednesday approached her calmly and called her name. Wednesday, didn't you leave with Luke? What do you want? Enid asked, a bit surprised to be addressed by her. I need to tell you something. Let's go outside, Wednesday said, straightforward and to the point. Enid stared at her for a moment before reacting. She set a bandage on a small table and followed her. Wednesday moved away from the crowd and then created a dome of darkness that enveloped her and Enid, ensuring their conversation couldn't be overheard. Why the dome? I can't see you, Enid said, unalarmed. Her enhanced sense of smell allowed her to pinpoint Wednesday's location, so she wasn't worried about a sudden attack, especially since it would be odd for Wednesday to attack her out of nowhere. "You don't need to see me for what I'm about to say," Wednesday replied. "What is it? I need to keep helping. Make it quick," Enid said indifferently. She wasn't thrilled about having a one-on-one conversation with the person who had stolen her boyfriend and who she now wanted to steal back. The only positive thing for Enid was that Wednesday was with Luke because she genuinely cared for him, something she had learned that very night. Wednesday wasn't just interested in Luke for his genetics. The two had once shared a brief friendship, but it had been fleeting and undeveloped. Now, the only thing connecting them was Luke. Between friendship with Wednesday and Luke, Enid chose Luke. The same was true for Wednesday. She would choose Luke over friendship with Enid. "Don't send Luke any more letters, or at least, if you do, have the courage to sign them with your name, #1 fan," Wednesday said in a tone that was both mocking and cold. I don't know what you're talking about," Enid said, trying to sound confused. "Play dumb if you want. Luke gave me the letters from this secret #1 fan, and I recognized your handwriting," Wednesday said, unfazed by whether Enid admitted it or not. She just wanted to make it clear that Enid should stop sending letters to Luke. As Luke's girlfriend, she found it intolerable that his ex-girlfriend was sending him those kinds of letters. Not because she doubted Luke's loyalty. She knew he was faithful. It was obvious in the way he risked his life to protect her and his near-obsessive concern for her safety. What bothered her was knowing that another girl was pursuing him, fully aware he was in a relationship. "Anything else?" Enid asked, neither confirming nor denying Wednesday's accusation. "Yes, Luke and I won't be attending Nevermore. We're going to Ohio, to Sunnyvale and Shadyside, 2 nearby towns," Wednesday said with total indifference. "What?" Enid exclaimed, more shocked by this than by anything earlier. How could she hope to win Luke back if he wasn't going to Nevermore? Even stranger was that Wednesday was sharing this information after threatening her earlier about writing letters to Luke. "Why are you going there?" Enid asked. "A mission. I suppose you can figure out the rest," Wednesday replied, offering no specifics. "I see. Why are you telling me this?" Enid asked again. Wednesday tilted her head slightly, as if assessing her. "Because you could be useful. Today you proved you're not as weak as the other useless students," she said, her voice a mix of acknowledgement and disdain. 5. Enid was one of the few students who had been truly helpful against the demons. She had even managed to kill a few on her own and had faced off against the nearly evolved small Morak. "Is that all?" Enid asked, her mistrust toward Wednesday evident. She believed the part about Ohio, but she doubted Wednesday's true intentions. "Believe me or don't. If you decide to be useful to Luke and come to help, you must do so with extreme caution and without anyone noticing. The Spellmans may have their eyes on you, so don't come immediately. We'll be there for several months, so take your time and plan how to get there unnoticed. We'll be incognito with different identities, so don't look for us openly," Wednesday said seriously. With those words, Wednesday dispelled the dome of darkness that had surrounded them. She turned without another word and began walking back toward the mansion. As she walked away, a small, almost imperceptible smile appeared on her face, not one of satisfaction, but something far more sinister. "Perfect. Walk straight into your death, Enid," Wednesday thought, her eyes devoid of any trace of compassion. The slight curve of her lips vanished almost immediately, replaced by her usual impenetrable expression. She knew Enid would come. That spark of wounded pride and unresolved feelings for Luke was enough to confirm it. Everything Wednesday had said was calculated to draw her to Sunnyvale, the place where her vision would come to fruition. 11:15 p.m. Indianapolis, Indiana 1. "Tomorrow, we leave at 8 in the morning. Set your alarm," said a middle-aged blonde woman with blue eyes, looking at a young girl who was also blonde, though the girl possessed an otherworldly beauty. The beautiful girl was none other than Luke. The middle-aged blonde woman was Natasha, who had altered her appearance. Her current name was Lucy Foster, a widow with 2 daughters, one of them Luke, or rather Tuesday, and the other Wednesday, using the alias Jenna. It had been a few days since they had left Petropolis Manor undercover. Initially, their flight had been swift, but they later stopped flying and began taking numerous detours and random paths decided by Natasha, who took their undercover mission very seriously. They had over 2,000 miles to travel to Sunnyvale and Shadyside. For the time being, they would stay in Shadyside. As for the neighboring town, Sunnyvale, it was less than 15 miles away and would also need to be explored if they found nothing in Shadyside. They were now very close to their destination, and it seemed no one was following them, which was a good sign. In the end, the demon attack on Petropolis Manor had brought an unexpected advantage. They only had about 112 miles left to travel by road to reach Shadyside. Since they were so close to the town, they would proceed using their false identities, meaning that Luke had to stay in his feminine form whenever they were in public. "I know, see you," Luke said reluctantly, still in his feminine form. He wore a black hoodie that partially concealed his face, though it couldn't hide the cascade of golden hair spilling from its edges. The long, sleek strands fell elegantly, shining under the dim light and contrasting against the darkness of the hood. Luke said goodbye to Natasha, who entered room number 7. He walked a few more steps and entered room number 9. Closing the door behind him, he walked down a short hallway that led to a double bed, 2 nightstands, and a medium-sized plasma TV mounted across from the bed. In one corner, there was a small desk with a chair near the window, whose curtains were drawn shut. At the foot of the bed was an open suitcase, and Wednesday stood nearby, organizing her new clothes. Since she was using a false identity, she had to wear less gothic clothing and make an effort to put together more conventional outfits, though they were still predominantly black or white. She was currently wearing the dress Luke had given her for her birthday, but what would surprise everyone who knew her most was her hair. She no longer had her signature 2 braids. She had cut her hair, which now reached just past her shoulders. It suited her well, but it was strange not to see her with her long, perfectly symmetrical braids. Despite not being famous, Wednesday took the undercover mission very seriously. It was true that she wasn't publicly known like Luke. She didn't even have social media. But in the world of outcasts, she had built a reputation, aside from being an Addams. That was why she had to make an effort to change her appearance. Plus, according to Luke, her usual outfit was too eye-catching, which wouldn't be ideal for the mission. Luke glanced at Wednesday and suppressed the urge to hug her for 2 reasons. First, he was in his feminine form, a form Wednesday disliked. And second, she was still mad at him for stealing her prey the night the demons attacked. He sat down in the chair and observed Wednesday, who didn't even look up or say hello when he walked in. "How do I get her to stop being mad?" Luke wondered, resting his delicate hand on his chin. He checked the time. There were about 10 minutes left before he could return to his male form. That was the time he had to come up with a solution. While Luke pondered, the minutes ticked by, and at one point, Wednesday picked up a black skirt and turned to face him, holding up the skirt for Luke to examine. "Do you like it?" Wednesday asked, her tone devoid of emotion. Luke murmured, not expecting such a question from Wednesday, but he quickly answered, thinking she might have let go of her anger. "Yes, it'll look great on you." "I know, it's not for me. It's for you, Galadriel. You should wear feminine clothes, not your brother's oversized outfits," Wednesday said sharply, eyeing Luke's hoodie and pants, which were clearly too large for his feminine form. "Galadriel, brother, are we going back to that?" Luke thought, a faint twitch forming in his eyebrow. "Open your mind, Jenna," Luke said, emphasizing her fake name. "I might look like a woman because of this potion, but I identify as a man and I'm a lesbian since I'm only attracted to women. As for my clothing, I prefer what an average straight guy would wear, so you'll never see me in a skirt. I'd rather see you in one," he added. Wednesday raised an eyebrow. "A lesbian who identifies as a man. Well, Galadriel, I wonder what my brother would think if he found out about that." "I don't care. If I break him heart, even better. My revenge will be complete. Luke said with a smile that only highlighted his flawless features. While we're at it, do you realize this whole debate about countless genders and sexual orientations is a pathetic invention by normies trying to label themselves in a world that doesn't even accept them? I didn't think the level of stupidity could reach such heights. The worst part is that there are some outcasts who actually like this, Wednesday said with clear disapproval and disdain. 28. She had seen some of her doormates last year at Nevermore adopt these new definitions. 1. Luke seized the opportunity to critique normie society alongside Wednesday, who continued packing her suitcase. It was fortunate the topic arose spontaneously, as it prompted Wednesday to stop calling him Galadriel and actually speak to him. There was something almost therapeutic about sharing this critique of normie society. Luke reverted to his male form, and thanks to wearing clothes in his size, he didn't need to change. Now back in his male form, Luke stood up from the chair and approached Wednesday. Without hesitation, he extended his arms and wrapped them around Wednesday's waist, pulling her close enough that his chest gently touched her back. The difference in their height made his chin nearly graze her shoulder. "Will you stop being mad now?" Luke asked. Wednesday, who allowed him to embrace her, responded with another question in her usual tone. "When have I been mad?" "Oh, come on, admit it. Ever since the fight with the demons, you've been talking to me less, and when you do, it's only to throw snide remarks my way," Luke said. "No, I don't know what you're talking about," Wednesday replied. She knew she hadn't been entirely rational about the matter. After all, Luke had apologized over the last few days and had tried to make amends, and even though she was aware of that, she couldn't help but keep up the act. Something about his persistence stirred a strange mix of emotions in her. The initial anger was fatting, but having Luke there, trying to soothe her, was oddly satisfying. "So, you're still playing hard to get. Tell me what I have to do to make you stop being mad," Luke said, knowing that in her straightforward nature, Wednesday would give him the answer he was looking for. Hearing his words, Wednesday slowly stepped out of the embrace and sat on the bed with her legs crossed. Luke struggled not to look at her legs. "Will you do whatever I tell you?" Wednesday asked, staring at him intently. "Yes, if it means you'll stop being mad, then yes, I'll do whatever you say," Luke replied. "Kneel," Wednesday said in a cold tone. Luke obeyed, and as he knelt, he was lower than Wednesday, who was sitting on the bed. "What now?" asked Luke. "He leaves his pride behind," thought Wednesday in surprise, though she didn't show it in her expression. She knew how proud Luke is. For him to really get down on his knees, he must be very concerned about resolving her anger. "Now," said Wednesday. As she stopped crossing her legs, she stretched them forward, sitting more casually and openly. Luke, as he knelt, had Wednesday's legs very close to him. That movement didn't go unnoticed, and he couldn't help but stare. Since she was wearing a dress, he could see her underwear. "Black," thought Luke, swallowing saliva. "Do it," Wednesday said without being very explanatory. Luke looked up, meeting her eyes looking at him, and had also formed what appeared to be a slight smile as he noticed Luke couldn't resist looking at her underwear. "Do what?" asked Luke uncomprehendingly. "Do I have to be more explicit?" asked Wednesday, spreading her legs a little wider and moving closer to Luke, who had his face closer and closer to her. "Oh, no, no," said Luke, instantly understanding what Wednesday was referring to. He was confused. Was this a punishment? However, he would not argue and started on his duty. After several minutes, Luke pulled his head out of Wednesday's dress, which had been pulled up, exposing almost the entirety of her pale legs. Wednesday was no longer sitting up straight. Instead, she had laid down on the bed, and her breathing seemed erratic. After Luke finished, it took a few seconds for her to stand up straight again. "Well," said Wednesday, wiping a bit of saliva from her mouth, trying to keep a stoic face. "Now it's my turn," she added, as she extended her bare foot towards Luke's crotch, who was slightly startled. He thought that at best tonight he would get her to address him and stop being upset, but instead, he got a lot more than he bargained for. "But first wash your mouth out," Wednesday said before Luke took off his pants. She didn't want to kiss someone with a face full of fluids, no matter how much of them were hers. "Yes, ma'am," Luke said, quickly heading for the bathroom. It looked like today was his lucky day. Luke, the morning after his big night with Wednesday, arrived in Shadyside in an ugly brown family car that Natasha had bought to move around as a family of 3. Shadyside is a town of 3,500 inhabitants. It was even less impressive than Jericho, and that was saying something, as Jericho was not exactly brimming with attractions. The most remarkable thing about Jericho was Crackstone's genocide, though it had been covered up by the authorities, who profited from the pilgrim's image by portraying him as a saint. Not to mention the Gothic Nevermore Academy hidden in the forest nearby. As for Shadyside, Luke and Wednesday had done some prior research online before arriving. Wednesday had to admit that this method was much faster than heading to a local library to dig up the town's history. Luke had given her a cell phone, which she accepted, partly due to her new identity. Here's what they discovered. Before 1666, Shadyside and Sunnyvale were a single place known as Union, a settlement of colonists with many similarities to the Pilgrims of Jericho, though with a smaller population. Union thrived like Jericho, but over time, internal tensions began to arise among the settlers. They found no information online about the exact causes of the split. However, the few records suggested it was due to a clash of interests between 2 factions within the community. These differences eventually led to the separation, dividing the inhabitants of Union into 2 distinct groups, Sunnyvale and Shadyside. This division birthed a long-standing rivalry between the 2 towns. "Why did we pick the poorer town to stay in?" Luke asked as he gazed out the car window at Shadyside's houses, many of which looked abandoned and neglected. The scene was depressing, almost desolate. There was barely any activity in the streets. Since they had arrived, they had only seen a couple of cars driving by and a few pedestrians walking, all with serious, indifferent, or seemingly sorrowful expressions. "Because it's the more suspicious of the 2 towns. When the Kyria clan was after me, I didn't have much time to observe Shadyside, but a few minutes were enough to notice it seemed like a dead town. Lifeless, gloomy, almost as if it were trapped in time," Natasha said as she turned the steering wheel to navigate a narrow street. "The townsfolk don't seem very happy to have visitors," Wednesday added, fixing her gaze on a woman watching her from the porch of a nearby house, her brow furrowed and her expression filled with clear distrust. If Wednesday had worn her usual cold, intimidating expression, those deep, dark eyes that could send chills down anyone's spine, the woman would have likely retreated into her house in fear. But this time, Wednesday was using a false identity and sporting a different look. She had even decided to change her personality, at least a little. She projected a much more ordinary image. Her face, though still striking, radiated a calm that exuded nothing but normalcy. She looked like a 16-year-old girl with a touch of elegance, but without the spark of psychopathy that usually made her so unsettling to everyone except her family and Luke. "Exactly. That's something I also noticed," Natasha continued as she parked in front of a 2-story house with a surprisingly well-maintained garden compared to the rest of the surroundings. "This town isn't very welcoming. Unlike other places like Jericho, where people don't exactly love tourists but tolerate them because they bring in money, here, there seems to be an underlying hostility toward anyone who isn't a local. It's strange, and that's precisely why I chose this town over Sunnyvale," she added, turning off the car engine. "At least the house doesn't look like a haunted mansion," Luke thought as he took in the house where he'd be living from now on. "Do you think this has something to do with my parents?" Luke asked. His parents must have passed through Sunnyvale and Shadyside to hide evidence somewhere in or around the area. Maybe they had caused some of this, like the massacre Edgar triggered in his fight with Edward and his brother, killing thousands of normies in the crossfire. A town would be left devastated after something like that, and recovery would be slow. Maybe, though I don't think it's very likely. There are no official records of any major catastrophe or large-scale incident during the time your parents were here. They came here on the run, with just enough time to hide the evidence before continuing their escape, Natasha replied. And while I'm not ruling out the possibility that John, Sophie, and the Spellmans were involved in a fight that led to normie deaths in this town, I doubt they were the direct cause of the atmosphere we're seeing now, she added, and Luke nodded, agreeing with her logic. His parents hadn't had enough time to create this lingering sense of despair in the town. Maybe the town authorities covered something up, Wednesday suggested in her trademark tone of disdain, crossing her arms. In fact, I'm 99% sure of it. The same thing happened in Jericho with Crackstone and his true nature, genocidal and xenophobic. Hey, get back into character, Jenna, Luke thought as he noticed his girlfriend's expression slipping back into the usual one that scared most people. In Jericho, Crackstone is still revered despite all the crimes he committed. They've got a statue of him, a pilgrim day, and even a stupid theme park where they charge $30 for entry. Normies have a peculiar way of forgetting history when it suits them, especially when there's money involved, Wednesday added with a dry, almost bitter laugh. Yeah, that's very likely, though it doesn't explain why Shadowside is like this. From what I know, Sunnyvale is thriving. We need to see it for ourselves, Natasha said as she opened the car door and stepped out. Luke, in his feminine form, got out and glanced toward the neighboring house. An elderly couple was seated on reclining chairs, staring at them with severe expressions. Let's see how they react, Luke thought with amusement, pulling back his hood and taking off his sunglasses, revealing his face. He smiled softly, offering a friendly expression, his melodious, gentle voice reaching the elderly couple's ears. Good morning, neighbors, he said in a voice so sweet it sounded like he was singing rather than speaking. If Wednesday was going to stay in character, he might as well do the same, like the time he role-played as a vigilante, though he quickly got bored of that. The elderly couple froze for a moment, their eyes slowly widening in shock at the sight of such a beautiful girl. They had never seen a face that looked as though it belonged in a fairy tale. The frowns that had dominated their features vanished completely. After a few seconds of silence, the couple hurriedly rose from their chairs, said nothing, and rushed into their house. Beauty wins again, Luke commented mockingly. Wednesday and Natasha rolled their eyes as they started unloading their belongings. Even they, both stunning beauties, hadn't elicited such a reaction from the elderly couple. Although Natasha was in her altered form as a gorgeous blonde woman to play Luke's mother, it was clear she couldn't appear unattractive if her daughter was this perfect. They entered the house, each carrying their things. The bedrooms are upstairs. There are 3, one for each of us, Natasha said, beginning to climb the stairs, with Wednesday and Luke following behind. We'll use one, won't we? Luke asked with a playful smile, glancing at Wednesday. He'd always wanted to share a room with her for various reasons. Cough. When they'd stayed in the hotel, they'd shared a room, and it had been a very fun night. Yes, Wednesday replied instantly. She also wanted to share a room with Luke. They'd already worked things out after their first serious fight and were now getting along better than ever. Oh, what a lovely sisterly bond, have fun sharing a room, Natasha said mockingly as she entered one of the rooms and closed the door before Luke could protest. Wednesday, unaffected by Natasha's teasing, examined the 2 remaining rooms. She chose the slightly larger one with an ensuite bathroom. The room, like the rest of the house, was already furnished. Natasha had managed to rent the house at a very low price, fully furnished. In 2 days, we start school, a week late. Who would have thought we'd end up back at a normie school? Luke remarked, pushing one twin bed next to the other to create the illusion of a double bed. It was Friday, almost 6 in the evening, meaning they had the entire weekend to get through before school started on Monday. Fortunately, this normie school wasn't a boarding school like Nevermore. I'm used to dealing with normie teenagers, Wednesday said, having attended normie schools her whole life. She had only spent 1 year at Nevermore. That year at Nevermore had been the best school year of her life for various reasons, the main one being meeting Luke, followed closely by all the life-or-death battles she got to experience thanks to him. We need to buy a double bed, Wednesday added, noting the separation between the two beds. No matter how close they were pushed together, it would be uncomfortable. I'll buy one today, Luke replied immediately. The most important thing is a good night's sleep, right? They needed a proper bed to use and rest in optimal conditions. Thanks for watching this episode. Like, share, and follow for more interesting stories and narrations. Thanks a lot.